Good day, I'm Junior Researcher Adam Southgate, and today's lecture will be covering the Entropic sphere's Coesau Hir. I'd appreciate that all hunters please subscribe, as to not miss any future lectures, and also, if you enjoy the lecture and find it informative, please like the video and click the bell to ensure you do not miss any future announcements. I would also be very happy to hear your thoughts, views, and stories of your own interactions with the monsters of the spheres in the comment area of this video. Also, I'm always ready to answer any questions you may have, and please share these lectures with any hunters you feel would benefit from them. So, to begin, as always, we'll start with our general announcements. Firstly, the issue relating to the redcaps that have appeared within North Wales. As stated last week, the hunters that took on the contract were broken up into two distinct teams. The first hunting the redcaps themselves with the aid of a few Scottish hunters with more experience dealing with these particular beasts, and the second who went up to the English-Scottish border to attempt to discover who is transporting the creatures. The first team was broken up into three distinct teams of 6, each led by one of the 3 Scottish hunters. These teams then headed out to locations where bodies had been discovered drained of their blood, a typical sign of redcaps. Thankfully, this side of the operation proceeded with very little issue, with a great number of the creatures being destroyed. The team that headed to the English-Scottish border faced a more uphill battle. They found in several locations traps specifically designed to capture the redcaps alive, each baited with a civilian who had been bound and cut in a way to ensure slow bleeding but not death. Out of the 4 traps discovered, 1 had been triggered with a redcap and a deceased person inside, 2 had failed due to the bait dying before the trap could go off, and 1 was found untriggered and with the person still alive. After freeing this individual and treating their wounds, the team questioned them as to who had done this to them. Though they said that the people who had captured them never spoke, they did describe some interesting details. The individuals were human, but with masks of wood covering their faces. An unknown sigil was carved into the mask that seemed to possess a dim light. We will need to look into this mysterious group further with aid from the KSG, as they do not appear related to any other group we have had dealings with in the past. Secondly, and rather oddly, a new type of entity has been discovered wandering around a disused coal mine within one of the valleys. While this would only be a curiosity, normally the sheer number of these beings raises alarm bells, and these numbers are growing steadily. We know nothing of these entities, not even which sphere they originate from, but they are an imminent threat to the nearby town of Blackwood, along with a number of other towns in the area. Our current goal, then, is to establish a containment ring around the area and to capture one of these creatures for study so we can assess the threat we are facing. This will most likely be a large-scale contract requiring a decent amount of hunters. As such, we are opening up the poll system once again to allow hunters to make decisions easier. You can vote on these polls daily as the situation develops, which will determine the path we take going forward. Also, if you wish to take a solo action that does not involve the larger group, or you wish to suggest a bigger action for the group to take, leave a comment stating what you wish to do so we can keep a record of who's doing what. While it may seem redundant telling hunters of the monsters of the spheres to be careful, considering you all know to do so already, in this case I feel that it must be reiterated, as again we know nothing of these creatures, only that they are in large numbers, with the last estimate count being in the thousands. So the last thing I will say on this matter, for now, is good luck, hunters. To begin today, we will have a quick recap on the Entropic sphere. Unlike the other greater spheres, the Entropic sphere only possesses one type of entity, that of the benign spirit. We believe that they exist within their own sphere almost as a liquid of sorts floating mindlessly in a sea of unchanging stillness. Once a breach occurred between our sphere and theirs, they literally flooded in to the point where we are now surrounded by these mindless beings. This, in and of itself, is a non-issue, as they are incorporeal and non-visible. The problems begin when certain parameters are met. We are unsure of the mechanics, but when certain events transpire, typically violence or tragedy, these benign spirits gain sentience. This is not truly authentic sentience, but one based on the individual that is closest to the event, typically the victim. From here, there are two distinct directions these spirits can go. The first is an evolution of their already existing incorporeal form as they change into beings like the Wraith. The second is an abandoning of their incorporeal form for a corporeal one via the means of possession. This possession can take a great many forms, from the inhabitation of living people, changing the person drastically, like with Ikerthedin Varu, to inhabiting inorganic materials such as Forky the Orky. Today's subject, the Coesau Hir, is just one example of what happens when a spirit inhabits what was once alive, but at the time of possession was not. Such beings have a malformed sense of self, as the beings they are mimicking their own minds from is degraded due to death. While for those that remain incorporeal, this does not seem to cause too much of an issue. For those that possess a body, it is highly disruptive. If one is unlucky enough, it can be heard in the dead of night when most other sounds are silent, the choking, wet sobs of a poor, unnoticed wretch. While pity may be your first response, any attempt to aid this thing will be your end. If you were to ignore this warning and wander into the night, well, best to use an example. We will use a hypothetical person that we will call James. James has decided to camp within a field of a local farmer. It has been a bright and balmy summer, with no rain to speak of for weeks, so it should be rather comfortable. Late into the night, James is tossing and turning, trying in vain to get comfortable within his small two-man tent, when he hears it. It sounds like a strange mix of someone trying to swallow while also failing to speak, interspersed with heaves of sorrow. James, having never seen a horror movie and being worried that someone might be in trouble, decides to investigate the strange sound. Leaving his tent with torch in hand, he begins walking in the direction of the noise. He decided to go barefoot as the ground was dry from the days of sunshine. However, it doesn't take long before he begins to feel that this was a mistake. The closer he gets to the sound, the wetter the floor becomes, starting with the grass beneath his feet being slightly moist. It's not too long before he can feel mud squelch between his toes. James doesn't have time to question this, however, as the choking sobs grow louder as he approaches. Soon the mud is up to his knees, and each step is a struggle. The cry is surrounding him, but even if he decided to turn back, it's already too late. James can feel with his feet that there are patches where the floor appears to vanish deep below the muck, and any wrong step could prove his end. Somehow, and beyond James's understanding, he ends up on an island, the muck up to his knees, but a step in any direction would lead to a deep abyss of swallowing mud. James calls into the darkness for aid. He can see his tent on the other end of the field. He hasn't walked all that far, but to him it's been hours. The sound of the burbling cry has only gotten louder, despite the fact that James is no longer moving. Rising from the mud on unnaturally long legs and caked in the same thick, wet mud that covers the floor, Coesau Hir stands before James. The burbling cry coming from the being as it tries to speak, but can only push out more muck from its own lungs. Before James can react, the creature wraps its distended arms around him, and both vanish beneath the muck. The next morning, no sign of James will be found, except for the tent still in the dry, sun-baked field. This is the typical hunting strategy of a Coesau Hir, and a few days later, in another part of the country, a new Coesau Hir will hunt, sharing a similar silhouette to James. The Coesau Hir stands at around 10 feet tall, though there are some examples of taller individuals. Both their legs and arms are stretched to unnatural lengths and are stick-thin and would typically not support their frames. However, due to their supernatural qualities, they do, and also give them unnatural strength. Their bodies are covered in a thick wet mud that seems to ooze from their sweat glands at a steady rate, while their lungs constantly produce the same mud. While Coesau Hir do attempt to speak, they are unable, as the mud emanating from their lungs flows up their throats and out their mouth continuously. This, however, does not explain how they are able to change the landscape to that of a bog, and then back again. This appears to be a mild reality warping ability innate to the species, though whether it is intentional or not is unknown. There is a popular theory as to the origins of Coesau Hir. Simply put, the idea goes that before the Roman invasion of Britain, the isle was made up of dense woodland and thick bogs. The people living in Britain, the Celts, had created religions and culture around these geographic elements. After the Romans had conquered much of the isle, they'd begun cutting down the forests and draining the bogs to make room for more arable land. The theory goes that an individual with a strong tie to these wetlands witnessed this change in the environment and despaired. We know that these ancient Celtic people did walk these wetlands with the use of stilts attached to their legs. So, if one of these individuals in turmoil, as their way of life disappeared around them, drowned within one of these bogs, and a spirit inhabited their body after the fact, we may end up with something similar to the Coesau Hir. A big piece of evidence for this idea is that the Coesau Hir only appears to go after those of Roman descent, which at this point is nearly everyone in Wales, as we are the Romano-Celts, the descendants of those Celtic people who integrated with the Romans. This would also explain why the Coesau Hir does not go after Scottish or Irish people, as they never integrated with the Romans. The idea that there was once only one Coesau Hir, created thanks to a situation that no longer exists, would be a good thing. However, the Coesau Hir turns its victims into more of itself, ensuring that the problem persists. As with our example, James, those drowned by a Coesau Hir will turn up again, however warped into a new instance of the entity. This was discovered by the Iron Cult, a group with less moral standards than ourselves, who implanted a captured civilian with a tracker and then gave them to a Coesau Hir. The next day, the tracker began transmitting 20 miles away from the location where the civilian was last sighted. After chasing down the signal, they found that the individual had become a Coesau Hir. When it comes to sentience, you think it would be an easy question to answer, as all entropic entities that have changed after entering our sphere are sentient. However, the waters get muddied, pardon the pun, in this case. While we can say for certain that the original Coesau Hir was a sentient being, it's more difficult to say with its offspring. They do not present the same range of behaviors exhibited by other entropic entities, being rather more uniform in their actions, with little deviation. While to us they may appear intelligent, this may only be due to their humanoid form and our preconceived biases related to said form. So, as hunters, how do you tackle a Coesau Hir? Sadly to say, they are extremely difficult to hunt safely due to them only showing themselves at the moment that they strike, which is why the only way to face them is to trigger their trap. The first thing to say is that ranged weapons, for the most part, are out, due to the rounds passing straight through their bodies as it would mud. The most effective solution is the use of cutting melee weaponry such as axes or swords. With these weapons, the aim is to remove the creature's arms and legs while not allowing yourself to be dragged into the muck. This can be achieved with high enough caliber rounds, however the recoil is likely to throw you off balance, giving the Coesau Hir time to grab you before you can fire again. Once successful, you will need to grab and lift the now limbless torso from the muck, hoisting it above your head. The aim is to break its contact with the muddy ground. Once done, the mud around you will begin to recede, leaving you stood on firm ground. You will then need to place the Coesau Hir within a container or large waterproof bag, so that it cannot re-establish its bog by contacting the ground. After all this is done, and truly it is far more difficult than I'm making it sound, the entity can be handed over to the Order for disposal. This disposal is achieved by drying out the entity with a large amount of silica, at which point the husk can be burned and the spirit returned to a benign state. The only thing that makes this remotely possible is the pause the Coesau Hir makes before it strikes. As with our example, after rising from the mud in front of its victim, Coesau Hir will typically take a beat of 3.42 seconds before it lunges. The Coesau Hir is not the only entropic entity of this kind. Within Scotland exists the bog crawlers, spirits that have taken on the form of people who have drowned in the titular bogs. In fact, there are a great many examples of such entities across the world that are twisted reflections of those who have drowned in such places. While at first glance it may appear as if there is a larger element at work with these beings, the truth is far more mundane. People are simply far more likely to die in places with deep sucking mud, and such deaths are likely to take a fair amount of time, increasing distress. This is the perfect set of factors to turn a benign spirit into something altogether more harmful. But that will be all for today. With Arthur's might and Merlin's wisdom, thank you.